Hello everyone, I'm Shanu Sharif from Explorer Brothers. Today I am going to talk about ISO, and this is very important along with aperture and shutter speed. Now ISO is very important because most of the beginner photographer can have noisy photography. So in this video, I'm going to talk about that how you're going to use ISO like a pro so that you can get the best result out of your camera. What is ISO? ISO is the sensitivity of light in your sensor. ISO controls the brightness of your photo. In a dark environment, if you increase the ISO, your photo will be brighter. Now, in most of the time, people increase ISO and get a noisy photo. So you have to control your ISO in a way so that your photos are sharp. Now, most of the time, please try to use your aperture and shutter speed and try to make your ISO as low as possible so that you can have the sharpest image possible. But in darker environment, you have to increase ISO. While you have a moving subject, you have to consider it to have a bit noisy photograph, but you can fix it in Lightroom as well. Now let's talk about ISO value. So there are people often ask to me that some camera offer ISO from 100 to 64,000 and some camera offer 64 to 124,000. So this is a huge range of ISO level to adjust your brightness in your photography. Now in this video, I'm going to show you that how ISO affect your photography. Simply, when the ISO speed is doubled, the brightness of the photography will be doubled. So if a photo is taken at ISO 200, will be twice brighter than a photo taken at ISO 100. Base ISO. Now, you have to know the base ISO. The base ISO is the lowest level of ISO in every camera. Most of the camera use base ISO is 100. And in these base ISO settings, you can have the best quality picture. So most of the time, try to use the base ISO settings. However, in most of the cases, maybe you will not able to use these base ISO settings, especially in low light condition. You have to increase the ISO, but you have to be careful that you don't have to use too much of ISO so that you can avoid noise in your photo. The noise visibility. In this image, I'm going to demonstrate the noise visibility of ISO. To visualize the noise of ISO, let's demonstrate two pictures side by side. These two pictures of the same subject are taken from the same frame at different ISO value. The noise in the picture taken with higher ISO value is visible very clearly. The image at ISO 3200 has much more noise than the one at ISO 200. However, the brightness in both pictures are almost at the same level as I have used long shutter speed to capture the picture at ISO 200. So try to avoid use higher ISO unless the condition require. How to change the ISO? Now changing ISO varies from camera to camera, but the science is almost the same in every camera like Canon, Sony or Fuji. You need to get out of auto mode to manual mode, or shutter priority mode, or aperture priority mode, or program mode will let you use or let you change the ISO value. But for some entry-level DSLR or mirrorless camera, maybe there will not be any dialer. So you have to go to back screen and find for ISO settings, and from there you can change it. But most of the camera has a dedicated ISO dialer. You can change the settings to have the desired ISO level. Now check your camera manual if you're having hard time finding the ISO settings in your camera. So you have to know where is the ISO settings, because you have to change it quite often and very quickly, because in low light condition, if you're shooting any moving subject, then you have to quickly increase the shutter speed and the ISO level as well. When to use low ISO? You have to check the light condition of the environment. Say for example, if you have the plenty of light in a room or outdoor, you have to use as low ISO as possible, like 100 or 200, to have the best quality photo. Even you can use the low ISO when you have a stable or still subject and you're using a tripod by using a longer shutter speed like 1 or 2 seconds. Now I suggest you to always use histogram if it is available in your camera. That will give you suggestion the light condition of your environment. Now in next video I'm going to talk about the histogram thing, that how you're going to use this to have a great picture. When you'll be using higher ISO, in most of the time in low light condition you have to use high ISO. So in many cases when you're in a situation that whether you have to take a sharp photo or you have to take a blurry photo, in that case you have to increase the ISO. So when you increase the ISO, you will have a bit gray noise, but at pixel level. So don't worry increasing ISO at that moment. Maybe you will face situation that you have a flash, but the subject is bright or subject is white, it reflects on some portion. You cannot use the flash. In that case, you have to increase the ISO as well. In many cases, maybe you will not be able to use tripod as well. So in that case, you have to increase ISO as well. In most camera, auto ISO settings works very well in low light condition. You can also set the max ISO that camera is going to use in auto settings. How to minimize noise and maximize image quality. It is not always true that you have to use base ISO 100% of the time. But in low light condition, use higher ISO to have a good photo, otherwise your photo will be dark. You should use low ISO when you have sufficient light in your environment. But don't force yourself to use always low ISO. So most of the cases in sports photography, use higher ISO will be the best option for you. To maximize image quality, you have to follow the few steps. Select the aperture settings that will provide you the best depth of field. Now, set your shutter speed according to your subject and then set your ISO to have the proper exposure. If your ISO getting too high and still you have the ability to use a wider aperture, open it until the ISO gets to a manageable level, even if it means sacrifice some of your desired depth of field. That's all it takes. If you follow this step, you'll capture quality image every time. You will find the ideal balance between motion blur, noise and depth of field. So please subscribe to our channel and stay connected.